the name of the talk is the 5 self-care keys to your healthiest year yet. One of the ways that we promote the practice is Rachel and I do a podcast. So 110 weeks in a row, we did a podcast. So we had just over 2 years of an episode going. And we interview healthcare providers, we interview athletes, we interview all these different people from all walks of life in regards to health. And what was interesting is after about 60 or so episodes, we realized that most of the time, everybody was saying the same thing. It was different words, it was different jargon, maybe they did different stuff, but at the end of the day, it was pretty much the same stuff. And we're like, and it's not that we're not smart, you couldn't have heard it this many times without being like, all right, we get it. So what we did is we started to put together what we considered these principles that we thought were really critical in being able to teach people. And then what we noticed is when we talked to people about them, they resonated really well, and then we noticed change with their behaviors or with their belief systems or how they acted or behaved. And so that's kind of the origins of this talk. So what's interesting about these 5 principles is that they're very much like health in that they are not a destination. It's not like you can work out 3 times and then you're like, I'm good, I'm healthy for the rest of my life, right? So it's like this ongoing challenge. And the second piece that's interesting about them is if you can implement all 5 and then you can balance them, that's the hard part, balance them, then we call that living an aligned life. That's where the name of the business comes from. So the name is really not important, so I don't want you to focus so much on that. What is important, and you could call it having your chakras aligned, being in a flow state, being on purpose, whatever that is for your life, right? For us, we call it an aligned life. It's kind of weird in that sometimes we will utilize a certain set of strategies, and all of a sudden we get into this place where it seems like the universe is working for us instead of against us. It's almost like we're paddling down the river and we're just going with the current. And all we have to do every once in a while is stick the oar back there and just kind of steer a little bit. Have you guys ever felt sometimes it's just flowing, man. This is awesome. I don't know what the hell's happening, but this is a good time in life, right? And have you also had the opposite of that where you're like, oh my God, I cannot row this thing any harder, right? So we want us to be able to find this aligned life state as often as possibly can and stay in that state for as long as we possibly can, because then life is far more fun, far more productive. Okay. So are you guys curious about what these 5 things are?
Yeah.
I hope so. Okay, good. So let's
jump
jump
into
into
they come out
this.
of the podcast, or did they come out of what you guys pretty much?
They came out of
Out of your 6% of the time everyone's at the same age.
Yeah. It was genuinely from that piece. We had to discuss them and kind of whiteboard it out to kind of get a sense of what that really meant. What was the meaning behind the words? That was actually the fun part of this whole thing. But then once we got it, we felt really good about it. So here we go. So principle number 1. And I start with the most challenging one. Come on in.
Okay.
Nice to have you guys. Welcome.
Finally.
Rule number 1 or principle number 1 is knowing yourself. So guys, we really genuinely must know who we are. And I recognize that this is probably the most challenging part of all of it. And I also recognize that this is also a journey, not a destination, right? Again, as we change, the world changes, our environments change. And so even sometimes when we use the same strategy that helped us to get into that flow state or that aligned life state at one point in our life, if we try to go back later on in life and try to use the same strategy, have you ever noticed that it doesn't end up so well? Yeah, so this is really what we notice very commonly. So it's this constant progression of attempting to know who you are. The reason why it's the first principle that we talk about for living an aligned life is in order for you guys to determine what self-care is to you, the only person who can determine that is who? Right. So if you have a really good sense of who you are, which we're going to give you some suggestions on how to kind of navigate that if this is a new topic for you, which it was for me for sure, then this is going to help you. So one of the things that we really have you guys try to focus on is taking a look at your actions and your behaviors and attempting to determine, is this action or behavior self-care, meaning do I have a healthy relationship with it, Or am I doing what we call numbing? And we'll get to that in just a second. Examples of self-care, this would be like, for me, it's like taking a nap in the middle of the day. So you guys, I don't know if you know this, but like every day in between, yeah, see?
I enjoy that.
I do too, I love it. So I'll go home in the middle of the day and I'll knock out for 20 minutes. And for me, it's totally self-care. I get up on the other end of that nap and I feel like totally recharged. I'm like, let's go another 6 hours. Like I can hit the ground running. It's very good for me. That being said, someone else taking a nap in the middle of the day may be totally an avoidance tactic and they're just sort of attempting to sleep the day away and they just don't want to deal with the reality of their life. Can you guys visualize that experience, right? So we have to know ourselves first in order to be able to determine that. Another one would be like, a lot of times, because we talk with a lot of groups that are athletic based, working out 6 or 7 days a week for some people is awesome and is totally self-care and that's exactly what they need because they get energy from it, they get the stress out of their body, they're just like, okay, I'm ready. They feel confident and strong in their body. For other people, working out 6 or 7 days a week would be a complete disaster. They'd be just totally jacked and it would not be effective, right? So it's about navigating what that is for us. So, if we are doing something and we have a healthy relationship with it, then we call that self-care. If on the other side of that, we are doing something that we don't have a healthy relationship, we call that numbing. Okay? So my example, since we only have one other gentleman in the room, we'll use the example that I use when I speak to more women-based groups, which is the concept of fantasy football. So do you have any husbands or spouses or people that do fantasy football? So a lot of my buddies, they do fantasy football, right? And for some of them, that's totally self-care because we all get together, we talk trash, we have fun, we get to look at statistics and nerd out on football, which is really great. However, for other people, especially in my friend circle, that may not actually be self-care. They're spending a ridiculous amount of time looking at ESPN, when in reality they could probably be spending more time with their family or maybe doing something for their business or whatever. Like, there's an unhealthy relationship in that environment, right? And so we've crossed over from being self-care into now essentially getting away, avoiding what we have to deal with in reality. So just try to ask yourselves as you're going throughout your day, am I doing something that is actually healthful, that's driving health into my body, or am I attempting to avoid it? And that will help to gain a little bit of enlightenment in that regard. Something else that's really interesting in regards to this concept of knowing yourself is if you know yourself really well, you are able to set up what we call boundaries. So boundaries are rules that we follow, that we live by, principles that we live by, that we uphold even in the presence of other people. So even if your peer group will give you a hard time, even if they're going to make fun of you, even if maybe someone that you don't know, that may be a total stranger, even if they're going to give you flack for something, you still are okay with standing up for what you believe in. And that is a hard boundary. Now, what's interesting about boundaries, what we found, is that when we look at highly successful people, most of those individuals have very firm and lots of boundaries. Right? So the people that I think of that come to mind, like right off the bat, would be somebody who would be really successful, like Tim Cook, right? The guy who runs Apple, right? Like if we tried to call Tim on the phone, how's that going to happen? Right? Like we're never going to get through. Like we don't have access to him because he's not interested in our conversations most of the time. He's looking at what he needs to focus on, which is obviously different than what we need to. That being said, what's interesting about this concept of boundaries is when we go to, so for other people, like when we look at other people and how they have hardcore boundaries, we see that as extremely attractive. That is super magnetic. We're like, man, look at that person. They are so magnetic. They don't mess around. They don't drink soda. They don't take work calls after work hours. They don't take part in gossip, right? Like these people are just totally regimented. And we're like, yes, this is so attractive. But then when we go to think about setting up boundaries for ourselves, how do we feel?
Restricted.
We feel restricted. We feel shame. We feel guilt. We feel like we're kind of a dick. Like we don't want to do that. We don't want to step over the boundary because all of a sudden now we're actually putting ourselves first in many instances. And we're not willing to do that because we're all giving, loving, serving individuals, which is making it a little bit of a challenge. But at the end of the day, if we're really thinking about this in the big picture, one of the core foundational premises of being a person who contributes to the lives of other people is you also must take care of yourself. When? First. Okay, so very much important aspect of this. Now, if you've been told your entire life, who do you think you are? You're not special. What do you think you're doing? Then you will see boundaries and self-care as an indulgence. You'll see it as a luxury. You'll see it as something that those other people do, right? Good for those other people, but just not for me, right? And unfortunately, in that environment, you will suffer the consequences because you will put yourself last, and then that will end up being a problem, okay? So if we are doing this the right way, we have to recognize that the number one thing that determines if you will set a hard boundary is your self-worth. If you feel as if you are worth it, then you will set a hard boundary and you will have no problem standing up in front of anybody saying what you believe in. Trust me, and I know you are all worth it, genuinely. Every single one of you are all worth it. And so no matter what someone's told you in the past, you can rewrite the story, we can reframe that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? So it's interesting, one thing that we found also, there's one group of people in our population that have a really hard time putting other people, they have a hard time putting themselves in front of other people. Does anybody know what that group is?
The moms.
The moms, yeah. So moms are the ultimate caregiver in many instances, and so it's difficult for us to turn our attention inward and say it's okay for us to take care of ourselves, when in reality, that's probably the most highly prioritized thing we should be doing, because if we're going to take care of others, again, we have to take care of us first. So think about that, okay, just genuinely. Okay. Number two. Principle number two is we have to take full responsibility for everything in our lives. So we'll just let that bomb sink in for just a second. That is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so the good stuff, take full responsibility. So this is when we have a project, we come up with a plan, we execute the plan, it goes flawlessly, everything works out fantastic, right? So what do we do as adults when something goes fantastic? What's next? And we just put our head down and we keep going, right? Taking full responsibility of the good stuff means you actually celebrate your wins. So like in our office, we give you Devin trophies, we have you ring bells, we do all sorts of fun stuff to help you honor the moment, right? Rather than just moving past it and saying, what's next? Okay. So the bad stuff, how do we take responsibility for the bad stuff? So we have a project, we come up with a plan, we execute the plan, we get creamed. Doesn't go so well, right? So what's interesting about this is, you guys tell me if you're the same way, but for me, in my athletic career and in my professional life and in my family life, if you were to ask me what were all the wins you had, I would probably be able to tell you maybe a few. But if you ask me what were all the losses, I would be like, I could tell you what I was wearing that day, I could tell you all the details associated with it. What's up with that, right? This is real life. We have a tendency to want to focus on the bad stuff. So how do we take responsibility? Number one, we identify, was there something that we could have done better, right? Was this actually in our control? Because if it is, then we do need to take responsibility. If it's outside of our control, then maybe we just let it go, right? We could also think about pivoting, right? Going a different direction, or we could scrap the project entirely, or we could say, you know what? This was a short-term battle that we lost, but we're going to win the war. We're just going to keep pushing through, and we're going to keep moving this agenda forward. So there's ways to take responsibility for the bad stuff. Now, let's talk about the ugly stuff. So the ugly stuff is the stuff that we typically don't talk to people about, right? This is the stuff that maybe we only would speak to our close circle of friends. A lot of times this is stuff that maybe has been done to us, right? So what I'm not saying is if something's been done to you or you've had bad luck or something of that nature, you're not taking responsibility for what was done there. Let's be clear. But what you can take responsibility for is you can take responsibility for how you perceive the event and how you can reframe the event and how you can then use the event to potentially actually become leverage for you later on in your life. Right now, like I just recently read a book and I talked about it on Trending Tuesday. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. It's by Ryan Holiday. It's a fantastic read. You guys should check it out. The Obstacle is the Way. Essentially all he talks about is all these people throughout history came across really difficult challenges, and instead of using them as a crutch, they actually use them as leverage to be able to get to this next level of whatever they were in their life. And I would suggest that that is how you take responsibility of the stuff that's been ugly. The cool part about this, typically those ugly events in life, those are the things that oftentimes control us entirely, many times. We immediately take the control back once we determine that we are going to take responsibility for how we perceive the event and reframe and go the other way. That's cool because now you all of a sudden gain self-confidence through struggle, and then all you're doing is further reinforcing the fact that you can handle anything, which is truly being like a badass. So I love talking about that. So think about areas of your life, guys, where you've had good times and you haven't rewarded yourself, just haven't celebrated your wins. Think about the bad times and how you can take advantage of that, and think about the ugly experiences, how you can reframe and then pivot. Okay. All right. Number 3, long-term focus. So principle number 3 of living an aligned life is having a long-term focus. Now, I talked to one of my mentors the other day, and I said, what's the difference between people who are successful versus people who are absolutely like wildly out of your mind successful? Like, in your opinion, what do you think that is? And he said, in my experience, it's people who have laser focus for the long term. And I think that's really powerful. Immediately, once you start focusing not on the short-term stuff, but on the long-term stuff, it changes your lens by which you make decisions. So, it immediately allows you to do 2 things. Number 1, if you're not focused on the short-term, you're focused on the long-term, it allows you to make decisions in your day-to-day life very easy because you've identified what your objective is. So one of the people that we talked about on the podcast with was this guy who owns a company in downtown San Diego called Paleo Treats. Have you guys ever eaten any of these delicious treats? They're really good. Just try them out. Anyways, he was a Navy SEAL, and he now runs this company with his wife. And he said, for my business, my North Star, which I really like that terminology, my North Star is joy. And I was like, man, that's a really good objective. Like, if your long-term objective is joy, and you're making all your decisions in your business around, does this bring me joy or not? I think that sounds pretty awesome. Like, that's a life well lived, right? And it also helps you to make those decisions in the day-to-day because all of a sudden it becomes really clear. This is a black or white scenario. There's not a lot of gray in that. It's more binary than it is this sort of like mushy in-between that we oftentimes get stuck with. So I love that concept. So focusing on the long terms allows us to be able to focus on that North Star. Second, it stops us from getting caught up in the day-to-day details of getting to that long-term goal. So the example I always give in this talk is, if you were to run the Boston Marathon or have the dream of running the Boston Marathon, or the San Diego Marathon, if you were to wake up every day and all you thought about was how cold it was outside, how you had to get your clothes on, how you had to wake up, what music you were going to listen to, are my shoes good, like what's my run distance, if all you had to think about all day long was those details, it would be really difficult for you to be able to get to the end goal. It would be overwhelming in that environment. In comparison, if you woke up every day and you thought about the end goal, the long-term focus, which would be like, you're in the last 100 meters of the Boston Marathon, there's thousands of people around you, they're all clapping and cheering, your family's at the end of the race, your chest hits the tape, boom, cameras are flashing, right? You get to get like hugs and kisses and like a trophy or maybe a medal, right? I've never finished this race, you can probably tell me that. But you get the idea. You get one of these things. And if you thought about that when you woke up in the morning and on that training day, it would be way easier for you to actually be able to elicit that type of response, which is really what we're looking for. It's not about the details because, yes, we mold ourselves on those day-to-day experiences, but it's really those peak moments that are what define us throughout our life. When it comes to health, I have found for myself that I have often been very short-sighted in the way that I make decisions. So especially when it comes to competition, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, I was often willing to give up my my long-term health in order to hit a short-term competition-based goal. So I would want to compete more and perform at a higher level, even if that made me give up my health for a little while. Have you guys ever experienced this? Okay, so this is a symptom of not being long-term focused. So we really have to, again, reframe and start looking at how can we make better long-term choices in regards to our overall health. Not get caught up in the performance mindset. Number 4, living an aligned life, we talk about listening to your body. So you guys know that your body's crazy intelligent, right? It's constantly attempting to communicate with you all the time. We call those body signals symptoms. So pain, numbness, tingling, burning, weakness, coldness, all that stuff, these are all just ways of your body letting you know are the things that you're doing helpful or hurtful, right? So as a part of listening to your body, I think the secondary and probably just as important aspect of this is you also have to act upon what your body is telling you. In the typical gym environment, in the typical competition-based environment, we get really good at being able to turn off these body signals, right? The tougher you are, the cooler you are is sort of the concept here. We the reason why I can sit up here and have this discussion and feel totally aligned at this point is because so many times throughout my life I've experienced this ability to be able to sort of turn off body signals in order to be able to move forward in regards to performance. So 1998, if you guys can remember back then, 1998, senior in high school, I was the quarterback on the University City's high school's football team. We're in practice. I'm calling the play in the huddle, and all of a sudden I can't breathe. So I'm kind of like, and we haven't really done anything, so there's definitely no reason for me to be in that state. So call the play in the huddle, walk up to the line of scrimmage, we run the play, still can't breathe. I walk over to the sideline, I'm still sort of having this really difficult time breathing. Practice is like another hour and a half long. I'm still not telling anybody that anything is going on, and I'm still not breathing. Practice finishes, we walk down to the locker room. I'm sitting on the bench in the locker room, full gear, helmet on, everybody's like leaving. I'm still there, I've sweat through my whole uniform, still not breathing, still not telling anybody what's going on. The coach finally comes in, he takes one look at me, he calls the 911, ambulance comes, picks me up, takes me to the hospital. Later on, I found out I had actually collapsed my lung, and if I wouldn't have talked to anybody or had sat there for much longer, I could have potentially passed out and had brain damage and all sorts of crazy stuff. So the reason why I bring this up is because sometimes we don't want to show weakness, which is sort of like the football field, right? Last thing you want to show on the football field is weakness, right? Or that we're not tough. So I totally understand the fact that sometimes we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to bring up when we're struggling. We don't want to share our life story with our family members or with our friends. But there truly is a connection point necessary to be able to gain information from people outside of ourselves to get us to sometimes jump through the mental hurdle of actually starting to take responsibility, to listen to the body, to move into actually doing something to get ourselves well, and it's okay. So don't do what I do, typically. Okay? Silence is not okay. Number 5, last one, prioritizing self-care. So if we want to live an aligned life, we need to add all 5 of these principles together. We need to do our best at balancing all 5 of them. And number 5 is this prioritizing self-care piece. So if we're doing a good job in taking care of our bodies, people who are highly evolved, they don't wait for a lot of pain before they actually take action. In fact, they're far more proactive about seeking out what we call blind spots. Blind spots are parts of our health that we are unaware of what's going on, and yet at the same time they're still impacting the way that we are feeling or functioning. So my example or my analogy for a blind spot is sort of like if your body is like a really cool speedboat, and it's got big engines on the back, it's got racing stripes, you've got speakers, it's awesome, you're going 50 miles an hour across the water, but for whatever reason you've got this little tiny hole in the bottom of the boat. That's your blind spot. So people who are really smart, again, like I said, highly elevated, you're seeking out these blind spots, and you're trying to address them as quickly as possible. The blind spots that I commonly see when it comes to the physical body is, number 1, I think that people oftentimes lack getting some body work. So that's maybe your massage, that's maybe acupuncture, that's maybe your chiro, etc. I think we don't get much sleep these days, especially as a parent of 2 young children. Mine are 9 and 6. They still don't sleep awesome most nights, so we lack sleep, and that's a major thing. In fact, the other day, I had like a really good night's rest. It was like 10 hours, and I woke up and I felt amazing. I was like, this is unbelievable. If I could only operate like this all the time, this would be cool. So I think one of the blind spots we see is sleep. Rest days, did you guys know it's okay to like take a down day every once in a while? I'm like looking around at you guys, I'm like, these are some high performing people in this room. So it's okay, sometimes you can actually just say, I'm done. Like I'm gonna be off, and it's okay. That's listening to your body and prioritizing your self-care, right? Last one, structural problems. I see this all day long. We talk at gyms many times, and I look around the gyms and I look at the body positions for people and I look at their structure and I'm like, oh dear God, is this really what's going on? Because a lot of times, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, not very helpful, not very good. Definitely injury susceptible in many of these positions. As a chiropractor, our job is to look at the overall structure of the body, right? So if we were to look at this, you know, the chiro's job is to look at the alignment and health of the spine and also of the pelvis. The spine has two major jobs. The first is that it helps to support our bodies and keep us upright. We call that posture. The second thing that it does is it helps to protect the spinal cord. The spinal cord connects the brain with the rest of the body by running right down the middle of the spinal bones and kicking nerve roots out to both the right and to the left-hand sides. Those nerves go out to everything in the body, right? So your glands, your organs, muscles, tissues, bones, all of it. All of these guys right here are totally dependent on getting energy effectively from the brain through the spine, across those nerves, and then into those organs and tissues. So the way that this relates to what we do as chiropractors is if your posture is upright, your bones are well aligned, there's not a lot of stress or tension on these spinal cord and nerves, and therefore the body works really well, functions well, it heals. That being said, when we talk about structural problems, what we notice commonly is that we'll have stress that will enter our lives, either in the form of something that happens quickly, like slips and falls or sports injuries, car accidents, that type of stuff, or repetitive postures. So we see a lot of this standing position, we see a lot of phone usage these days, that type of stuff. What this drives into the body are alignment shifts. So alignment problems that take place either on one joint, multiple segments, or potentially even whole regions of the spine that will actually shift out of their healthy position. When that happens, not only do we see that the joints involved with that misalignment not move very well, they get stiff and tight and restricted, but we also see that it puts stress onto those nerves. And once those nerves are under stress, how well they send that energy from the spinal cord across those nerves to the organs and tissues, that's not happening very well. We are compensating now. We have loss of flow, if you can think of it that way. Now the health and function of the part of the body at the end of the nerve is also being impacted, okay? So we see this very commonly. This will also show up when we look at people in our friend circle or in our community as postural problems. We'll notice a lot of this forward head posture positioning. We'll notice asymmetry when we look at the body from front to back with translations or shoulder height changes. What's interesting, and I think demands to be talked about these days, is when does all this type of stuff begin typically for people? What do you guys think? When does postural stuff start?
When they're little.
Yeah, definitely. Like never before have we ever faced this challenge of, we've got cell phones, we've got iPads, right? My son is now 9, but when he was in first grade at design, right, what do? They issue him an iPad on day 1. So he's 6 years old. It's awesome, super powerful technology, but the human spine doesn't really form until around 22, 25-ish. So from age 6 to 22, you're having a really large amount of time spent in a forward flex posture. What's the likelihood that they developmentally are normal structurally? Bagels, right? No, it's not going to happen. What we notice, this position here, when we look at the body from the side, the whole of the ear lining up with the midline of the shoulder, lining up with the hip, the knee, and then the ankle bone. They call that sagittal balance. Sagittal balance. So what we know about sagittal balance is, in the research, sagittal balance is the #1 radiographic indicator of whether in the future someone will have chronic pain or they will have the ability to do their activities of daily living without help. So if you have good sagittal balance, meaning all these dots line up, you're upright, you have good posture, then you'll be able to take care of yourself in the future, and you won't need to have assistance, and you won't have chronic pain, okay? But if you don't, if you have this forward head positioning like we commonly see now, even in some of our younger kids, adolescents and teens, and definitely moving forward into our older populations, we know that translates into you're going to hurt and you're going to have other people help you to do simple stuff. which is what I've never heard people actually want at the end of their life. The only thing people want, they just want freedom. They want independence. And to be able to make sure that they don't have a blind spot that is keeping them from being able to do these things, I think being able to focus on their structure, getting sleep, getting that body work done, having rest days, that's an absolutely critical, essential aspect of all that stuff. So, to kind of summarize and think about this, going back to the beginning, think about, number one, who are you? My suggestions on how to discover that, if you're still struggling in that environment, is, number one, I would write down all the stuff that I really like, not about myself, but that I actually like doing. What do you enjoy? And then conversely, what are the things that you actually don't like? What is the stuff you never want to do? Or maybe what are the things that you'd like to actually avoid? I think that's a really powerful way of being able to sort of discover that. I would also think back to pivotal moments in my life that have happened and think about maybe why they happened. Think about if the universe or God or whatever you want to discuss has an intention for those things, why have you ended up where you're at? Think about those pivotal moments and write down how you felt about them. What were they about? How did that change you? How did you evolve from that? What was the lens that you looked through in order to be able to determine how you experienced that life event? That's very powerful too. So if you know yourself, then the second one is, what are the things that I can take responsibility for? The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Next, how can I go and I can listen to my body in a very deep way and then act upon what it's telling me? A lot of times it's not that so much that we're not listening, it's the fact that we're not acting upon what it's telling us, at least for me anyways. Number 4 would be to go and have a long-term focus. So think back, where can I turn my attention? By the way, this is totally a side note, but all of these 5 principles also work really well for all the other areas of your life. So if you knew yourself really well, you listen to your environment, let's call it, if you prioritize your self-care, if you thought long-term, right, and you took full responsibility, would that help your financial life? Would that help your relationships? Right? So you guys get the idea? What's really cool about the principles and why I thought, at least from the podcast, was like, we're all just saying the same thing, man. We're just using different words. And so we can relate this to almost every area of our life. Just look at how we can incorporate that kind of content. So prioritize your self-care, think long-term, take responsibility, do all those wonderful things, and then live an aligned life. We hope that we can help you with those things when you're here in the office. I want this place to be a safe space. These days, if we are in isolation, like we were talking about at the beginning of this, I don't want that to be the case here. So I don't care where you're at on your health journey, you're okay here. Okay, we accept you where you're at. And I would love for you guys to be able to create a deeper community. So, meet each other, introduce each other, create that sense of like, we're okay. This is a good place for us to operate from. Okay? Thanks, guys. I appreciate your listening tonight. Well done. And thank you for